I've been sitting on this story for a long time, long enough that it started to feel less like a memory and more like a scar. Something I can't see unless I look for it, but I know exactly where it is. I'm not posting this for absolution. I'm not expecting sympathy. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm posting it now, other than I'm tired of carrying it alone. My name isn't really William, but let's go with that. I'm in my 40s now, living a life that looks painfully ordinary from the outside. Job, rent, groceries, small talk with neighbors. No one around me knows what I've done. Not the full list, anyway. This story's about one crime in particular, the one that taught me a lesson I never wanted to learn. Secrecy is more valuable than trust. Back then, I was working in a mid-level operations role at a logistics company. Nothing glamorous. Spreadsheets, inventory systems, shipment schedules, vendor contracts. The kind of job where you slowly realize you see things that could move markets, even if you don't feel important yourself. Delays, shortages, quiet contract disputes, sudden reroutes, little ripples that turn into waves if you know how to read them. I didn't start out thinking, I'm going to sell inside information. I started out thinking, I'm drowning. I was buried in credit card debt, medical bills from a surgery I couldn't postpone, and a divorce that somehow managed to be both mutual and brutal. Every paycheck arrived already dead on arrival. No cushion, no safety net, just constant low-grade panic humming in my chest. The idea first came from someone I trusted. That's the part that still stings. A coworker, I'll call him Eric, mentioned, half joking, half not, that people would pay good money to know certain things before they became public. He said it casually, like he was talking about sports betting tips. I laughed it off, but the thought stayed, and once it took root, it grew fast. I told myself I wouldn't hurt anyone. I told myself big corporations absorb losses all the time. I told myself I deserved a break. I told myself a lot of things that sounded reasonable in the dark. What I didn't tell myself, not yet, was that once you sell a secret, you don't own it anymore. And someone always wants another one. There's a difference between entertaining a bad idea and committing to it. For me, that line got crossed on a Thursday night in a half-empty bar that smelled like fryer oil and old beer. Eric and I were sitting in a corner booth, both pretending we weren't avoiding going home. He was nursing a whiskey. I was pretending my third cheap lager wasn't my third. We were complaining about work in that lazy, bitter way people do when they feel trapped. At some point, he leaned in and said, quieter than before? You ever wonder how hedge funds always seem to know shit before it happens? I shrugged. They've got better analysts. He smirked. Sometimes they've got people. That should have been the moment I shut it down. Instead, I asked, people like who? He didn't answer right away, just stared into his glass, swirling the ice. Then he said, people like us? My stomach did a slow, uncomfortable roll. He told me he'd been approached online months earlier. Not on LinkedIn, not through email, through an encrypted messaging app I'd barely heard of at the time. Someone had posted in a private forum about supply chain intelligence. Eric replied out of curiosity. That turned into a conversation. That turned into numbers. Nothing crazy, he said. They don't want documents. They don't want files. They want patterns. Early warnings. You talk. They listen. They pay. I asked the obvious question. Isn't that illegal? Eric gave a tired little laugh. Everything's illegal if you do it wrong. I pressed him. He admitted he'd already sold information. A few times. You serious? I asked. He nodded. Paid off my car. Half my student loans. No one's knocked on my door. My heart was pounding way harder than the situation seemed to warrant. I asked what kind of info. He listed examples. A port slowdown before it was public. A vendor about to drop a major client. An internal projection showing a looming shortage on a specific component. All things I either had access to or could easily infer. Why tell me? I asked. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, 'Cause you look like a guy who's about to snap. That landed harder than anything else he'd said. I didn't agree to anything that night. I didn't say yes. But I also didn't say no. When I got home, I logged into my bank account and watched the balance refresh. $43.17. I sat on my bed, shoes still on, and stared at that number for a long time. That's when the idea stopped being hypothetical. That's when it started feeling like an option. The next week felt like I was living two parallel lives. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work, I answered emails, I nodded in meetings, I microwaved sad leftovers in the break room and complained about traffic like everyone else. Inside, though, everything was different. Every spreadsheet looked louder, every report felt heavier. I started noticing how much information casually flowed past me every day. Forecasts, preliminary projections, internal chatter about renegotiated contracts, a delayed shipment here, a quietly canceled order there. Stuff I'd never cared about before suddenly looked like currency. That realization scared me more than the illegality because it meant the door was already open. Eric didn't push me. That almost made it worse. He never texted asking if I was in, never followed up. He just acted normal. Like the bar conversation had been a hypothetical exercise, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I Googled phrases like selling non-public information legality, what counts as insider trading logistics industry, whistleblower versus leaker difference. Every search made things simultaneously clearer and fuzzier. There were laws, broad ones, vague ones, gray areas that depended on intent, materiality, and impact. I latched onto the gray areas. I told myself I wouldn't give anything material. I told myself I wouldn't name companies. I told myself I'd speak in generalities. All lies I hadn't admitted yet. One night, after a particularly bad call with my ex about money I didn't have, I messaged Eric. Just 2 words. Still safe? He replied almost immediately. So far. That was it. No sales pitch. No instructions. Just confirmation that the path existed. My hands were shaking when I typed, "How do they contact you?" He sent me a link. Not a website, not a forum. An invite code for an encrypted chat platform. I stared at it for 10 minutes before clicking. The app itself looked boring. Minimalist. No logos, no flashy interface. It felt intentionally forgettable. I used a burner email. Fake name. No profile picture. When I entered the invite code, I was added to a single chat. 1 user. Handle. Northline. Their first message popped up within seconds. Eric said you might be interested. That sentence flipped something in my chest. Not excitement, not fear. Something heavier. Commitment. I typed, interested in what? 3 dots appeared, then observations about future disruptions. Not inside info, not company secrets. Language mattered. I asked about payment. They said, crypto, small test first. I asked what they wanted. They said, tell me something that hasn't happened yet but will. I stared at the screen. I already knew one. Our company was about to lose a secondary supplier in Southeast Asia due to a quiet contract collapse. It wouldn't hit the news for at least 2 weeks, but internally, we'd been warned to start shifting volume. If I told Northline that, a trader could position themselves. If I told Northline that, I crossed the line. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I could still walk away. I told myself I was just exploring. I told myself I wasn't actually going to send anything. Then I typed. Not the full details. Not names. Just major electronics components shortage likely. 1 large supplier exiting quietly. Expect ripple effects. I stared at the message. Then I hit send. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Northline replied, good. Wallet address? That's when I realized I'd already answered the question I'd been pretending not to face. I wasn't thinking about whether I would do this anymore. I was thinking about how to do it without getting caught. Once I sent that first message, something in me shifted. It wasn't a dramatic snap, no lightning bolt. More like a slow, ugly settling. The way mud sinks to the bottom of water and becomes part of it. If I was going to do this, I needed to not be an idiot. That became my new mantra. Not be ethical, not don't do it, just don't be an idiot. I spent the next few nights researching operational security like I was studying for an exam, burner phones, VPN chains, public Wi-Fi, metadata. I went down rabbit holes about how people get caught selling information. Almost every case boiled down to one of three things. They talked too much. They reused accounts. They trusted someone. That last one stuck with me. Secrecy is more valuable than trust. I didn't know it yet, but that idea was already carving itself into me. I bought a cheap prepaid phone with cash at a convenience store across town. Not near my apartment, not near my job. I drove out of my way, parked a block over, and walked in like I was doing something shameful, which I guess I was. I only installed 3 things on it: the encrypted chat app, a crypto wallet, a notes app, nothing else. No contacts, no photos, no personal accounts. At home, I kept it powered off, wrapped in an old sock, inside a shoebox in the back of my closet. I didn't want it anywhere near me unless I was actively using it. Next, I started mapping information, not stealing documents, not emailing files, just mentally cataloging. Which vendors were shaky, which shipments were delayed for real versus paper delayed, which internal warnings kept getting downgraded in meetings. I realized I had a pretty good instinct for what mattered. That scared me too. The more I observed, the more patterns I saw. The more patterns I saw, the more valuable I realized my perspective was. It felt like discovering a hidden superpower and hating yourself for wanting to use it. Northline didn't rush me. They just sent 1 message a day for a few days. Any more observations? No pressure, no threats. Professional, polite, cold. I sent another small one. Logistics congestion increasing at West Coast Port. Early internal chatter about labor slowdowns. They replied with a wallet address. I hesitated. Then I downloaded a public blockchain explorer on my regular phone and looked up the address. It had transactions, real ones. Not huge, but consistent. People were paying into it. People were getting paid out from it. This wasn't theoretical. I copied my own wallet address from the burner and sent it. 10 minutes later, Northline replied, "Sent." I opened the wallet. There it was. Equivalent of $1,200. I felt dizzy. That amount of money would have taken me nearly 2 weeks to earn at my job. I hadn't even broken a sweat. I hadn't broken into anything. I hadn't stolen anything tangible. I just talked. That's how I justified it. Talking, not stealing, not hacking, not blackmailing, just talking. That night, I paid 3 overdue bills. I slept better than I had in months. That scared me most of all, because it meant my conscience had a price, and apparently it was cheaper than I'd like to believe. After the first payment, I told myself it was a one-time thing. That lasted about 48 hours. Northline didn't celebrate, didn't praise me, didn't say good job. They simply asked, anything else upcoming? The casualness of it made it feel routine, like ordering coffee, like checking the weather. I realized something uncomfortable. I was already thinking ahead. In meetings, I started mentally tagging information. This could be useful. That's probably worthless. This one's interesting. I hated that internal voice. I didn't stop it. Instead of reacting emotionally, I turned it into process. I created rules for myself. Rules are a great way to pretend you're in control. Rule 1, never send information the same day I learn it. Rule 2, never reference internal document titles. Rule 3, keep everything high level. Rule 4, no company names. Rule 5, never discuss people. I told myself these rules made me safer. I told myself they also made me less harmful. Both were half true, at best. I started using the Notes app on the burner to jot vague phrases. Possible fertilizer supply dip Q3. Automotive chip backlog resurfacing. Retail chain renegotiating shipping volume. Just breadcrumbs. Later, I'd shape them into messages. Northline paid reliably, sometimes $800, sometimes $2,000. Once, $3,500. Always crypto, always fast. I developed a ritual: drive somewhere random after work, sit in the car, turn on the burner, send one message, turn it off, drive home. I never used my apartment Wi-Fi, never sent from work, never replied immediately. I tried to look like noise. The money started stacking up. Not life-changing rich, but life-stabilizing. Credit cards went down. Collections stopped calling. I fixed my car. I bought groceries without calculating every item. On the surface, my life improved. Inside, something was quietly rotting. I stopped feeling like a person who made a bad choice. I started feeling like a person with a side hustle. That shift is subtle and lethal. The biggest change, though, was how I viewed people. Coworkers stopped feeling like teammates. They became walking leak sources. Managers stopped feeling annoying. They became unintentional broadcasters. I never asked anyone for secrets. I never manipulated directly. But I listened differently. I remembered differently. I filtered everything through usefulness. That's when secrecy started outweighing trust. I stopped venting to friends, stopped oversharing, stopped telling people how stressed I was. Because stress makes people ask questions. Questions create patterns. Patterns get noticed. I became quieter, more contained. People described me as calm, focused, low drama, if they only knew. Northline never asked for more aggressive info, but one day they sent a message that shifted the scale. Looking for early signals on major contract changes, anything involving energy, agriculture, or transportation. That was more specific than usual. Still vague, but pointed. And I knew something. Not a rumor, not a hunch. Something solid. Our company was about to quietly lose a massive transportation contract tied to agricultural exports. The client was switching providers. Internal teams were scrambling to downplay the impact. If I shared that, traders could bet against companies exposed to that pipeline. People could make millions. I stared at my burner phone for a long time. This wasn't a ripple, this was a wave. I told myself, I'll think about it. But I already knew how this story tended to go. I didn't walk away. I started planning, and planning made it real. Knowing something big feels different than suspecting something big. Suspicions are soft. You can stretch them, blur them, lie to yourself about how certain they really are. What I had now was hard. I'd seen the internal email chain. Not directly addressed to me, but forwarded during a late afternoon scramble when someone looped in the wrong distribution list and then tried to recall it. By the time it vanished, I'd already read enough. The agricultural exporter wasn't considering alternatives. They were gone. The contract was effectively dead. The official announcement wouldn't happen for at least 3 weeks. Lawyers, PR teams, damage control, all the usual choreography. But internally, everyone knew. I spent that evening pretending to watch TV while replaying phrases from the email in my head. Significant volume loss. Immediate rerouting required. Confidential until public disclosure. Confidential. That word echoed. I told myself I wouldn't share specifics. I told myself I'd keep it abstract. I told myself I could downgrade the certainty. But I also knew Northline wasn't paying me for vibes. They were paying me for advantage. The next day at work, I paid attention in a way that felt almost predatory. I listened to 2 managers arguing quietly near the printer. I caught a passing comment about budget revisions. I saw a logistics planner rub their temples and mutter, "This is going to blow up Q4. Each tiny confirmation tightened the knot in my stomach. This wasn't one person's mistake. This was real. That night, I didn't drive somewhere random. I sat in my car in my apartment complex parking lot. Engine off. Lights off. That broke my own rule. I told myself I'd only be there a minute. The burner phone felt heavier than usual. Northline hadn't messaged again. They didn't need to. I opened the Notes app and stared at the line I typed earlier. Ag export transport contract collapse. Quiet. I edited it, deleted words, added vagueness, removed identifying phrases. What I ended up sending was large-scale transportation contract tied to agricultural exports terminating quietly. Expect downstream volume disruptions and earnings pressure for exposed carriers. I read it 3 times. My thumb hovered. There was still time to turn the phone off. There was still time to walk away. Instead, I hit send. The message delivered. No immediate reply. That was worse than an instant response. I sat there, heart thumping, staring at my dark windshield like I might see consequences materialize in front of me. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, the phone buzzed. Noted, stand by. That was it, no praise, no confirmation, just acknowledgement. I went inside and barely slept. Every sound outside my apartment felt amplified. Every car door slam made my muscles tense. My brain kept replaying the idea that I'd just sold something that could move markets in a serious way. Not theoretical anymore, not small, not gray, big. The next afternoon, I checked my wallet. $7,500, one message, one sentence, $7,500. I felt nauseous. I also felt something else. Power. That scared me even more than the money. Because fear can stop you. Power makes you curious about what else you can get away with. I told myself, this is the peak. I won't go bigger than this. It's almost funny how many times I've said some version of that in my life. It's never true. After the $7,500 hit my wallet, I told myself I needed to slow down. Not stop. Slow down. That distinction mattered in a way that says a lot about who I already was by then. I didn't message Northline for almost 2 weeks, not because I was noble, but because I was scared. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How often our company logged access to internal systems, how casually IT mentioned audits, how compliance emails suddenly felt like they were written directly to me. Every harmless corporate memo felt accusatory. I became hyper-aware of my own behavior. Did I linger too long in meetings? Did I ask questions that sounded like fishing? Was I remembering too much? Meanwhile, at work, the fallout from the agricultural contract loss started quietly surfacing. Emergency reroutes. Budget freezes. Tense, closed-door meetings. Nothing public yet, but internally, it was chaos. That terrified me because it meant the information I sold was real and consequential. Then something changed. Eric started acting strange. Not dramatically. Subtle stuff. He stopped joking around. He seemed distracted. One afternoon, he asked too casually, "You still talking to anyone?" My heart slammed into my ribs. I kept my face neutral and said, "Talking about what?" He shrugged. "You know, stuff." I said I'd never really started. That was a lie. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me a second too long. After that conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as invisible as I thought. A few days later, Northline messaged again, "Any developments related to transportation disruptions?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I knew more. A lot more. Internal contingency plans. Which regions were getting prioritized. Which clients were being quietly downgraded. It would be easy to send another vague summary. I typed one, then deleted it, typed again, deleted again. I kept thinking about Eric's question. I kept thinking about audits. I kept thinking about how much money I'd already made. In the end, greed beat caution, but it wore a disguise. I told myself I'd keep it smaller. I sent. Knock-on effects from recent AGI transport loss expanding into regional carrier capacity constraints. Expect localized congestion and rising spot rates. Northline replied with a simple, "Received." No money immediately this time. That made my anxiety spike. 2 hours later, $3,200 appeared. I didn't feel relief. I felt trapped, because now it wasn't just about debt anymore. My lifestyle had quietly adjusted to this extra income. I was depending on crime. That realization sat in my chest like a stone. I hadn't been caught. Nothing had exploded. But I felt like I was standing on ice that was getting thinner, and I couldn't tell where the cracks were forming anymore. Things stayed quiet for about a month, which somehow made everything worse. No explosions, no angry emails, no sudden investigations, no one pulling me into an office. Just the slow grind of daily work layered over the constant hum of paranoia. I kept feeding Northline small, abstract updates every week or two. Shipping pressure here. Supplier instability there. Nothing as big as the ag contract, but enough to keep the relationship alive. Enough to keep money coming in. And enough to keep me trapped. I started checking my surroundings more than necessary. I'd glance over my shoulder in parking lots. I'd lower my voice, even when I was alone in my car. I'd reread every message before sending it, then reread it again after, looking for some hidden fingerprint I might have left behind. Then one Tuesday morning, our company-wide email system went down for about 20 minutes. Just a generic outage. IT sent a bland status update. Normally I wouldn't have thought twice, but this time my stomach dropped immediately. My brain jumped straight to worst-case scenarios. Internal audit, data breach, monitoring tools, something triggered, something traced. For those 20 minutes I was convinced I was finished. I couldn't focus, I couldn't sit still. My hands were shaking so badly I pretended I had to use the restroom just to lock myself in a stall and breathe. I kept imagining security walking toward my desk. Kept imagining my manager asking me to come talk. Kept imagining cops. When email came back online and nothing happened, I felt a rush of relief so intense it almost made me dizzy. And then, disgustingly, I felt something else underneath it. Gratitude. Not gratitude that I was safe. Gratitude that I could keep going. That's the moment I realized something fundamental about myself had shifted. I wasn't someone who made a mistake anymore. I was someone who had incorporated wrongdoing into his identity. Later that week, Eric told me, casually, that another guy in a different department had been fired. Official reason, policy violations. No details. My heart jumped into my throat. I asked, what kind of violations? Eric shrugged. No clue. Could be expense reports, could be data access, could be anything. He laughed like it was nothing. I laughed too. Inside, I was spiraling. That night, I almost deleted everything. The burner apps, the wallet, the notes. I even held the phone in my hand, thumb hovering over the reset option. But then I thought about my credit card balances, now manageable. My car that actually ran. The fact that I hadn't gotten a collections call in weeks. And I didn't do it. Instead, I powered the phone off and hit it again. A few days later, Northline sent, looking for early indicators related to energy storage components, batteries, rare earth inputs, that area. I actually did know something. Our internal procurement team had flagged upcoming constraints in a specific battery material due to export issues overseas. Now, it wasn't catastrophic yet, but it had potential. I hesitated longer than usual. I told myself I'd skip this one. I told myself I'd wait. Then I remembered the outage, the fired employee, the fact that nothing had happened to me. The quiet started feeling like proof of safety. I sent a toned-down version of what I knew. When the payment arrived, I didn't even feel a rush anymore. Just a dull sense of continuation, like punching a time clock. That scared me more than the panic ever had, because fear means you still care. Numbness means you're settling in. Around this time, I started cutting corners. Not big ones. Small, stupid ones. I replied faster than I used to. I sent messages from fewer locations. Once, I even powered on the burner inside my apartment, which had been an absolute rule breaker before. Nothing happened. That was the problem. When you get away with things long enough, your brain rewrites reality into something safer than it actually is. At work, pressure kept increasing. Management talked vaguely about leak risks in a quarterly meeting, framed as a general industry concern. Everyone nodded. I felt sweat collect under my arms. Later that week, IT rolled out new access logging. We all had to acknowledge a policy update about monitoring internal systems. I clicked accept with a steady hand and a screaming mind. Northline kept asking for more targeted themes: energy, transport, industrial materials. I still avoided company names, but I started giving tighter timelines, more confident language. That made the info more valuable. It also made it more traceable. Eric grew quieter too. He stopped mentioning his side income, stopped joking about people like us. Once, when I tried to casually ask how things were going for him, he said, "I'm trying to lay low." That sentence sat between us like a dead animal. I considered stopping then. Not pausing. Stopping. But I had grown used to the money, and worse, used to the idea that I was good at this. I sent Northline another update about projected shipping bottlenecks tied to industrial equipment. They paid $4,000. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel guilty. I felt committed, like I'd signed a contract I couldn't see. The worst part was realizing I wasn't scared of getting caught anymore. I was scared of losing the income. That's when I knew the crime wasn't something I did occasionally. It had become something I was maintaining. The thing about systems is they don't usually collapse all at once. They start with tiny inconsistencies. One email that feels slightly off. One conversation that ends a little too carefully. One look that lingers a second too long. My first real warning came from my manager, and he asked if I had a minute to chat. Casual tone. Normal words. I followed him into a small conference room, already rehearsing innocent explanations in my head, even though I had no idea what I was defending against. He asked about my workload, asked if I felt overwhelmed, asked if I'd noticed anything unusual in our data environment. I said no. He nodded. Took notes. Let me go. That was it, but it rattled me badly. A week later, I noticed my system access had been slightly reduced. Nothing dramatic. Still enough to do my job. But a couple dashboards I used to see were now restricted. No explanation. Could have been routine. Could have been nothing. Or it could have been something. I didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at me constantly. Northline messaged asking about transportation again. I almost didn't reply. I told myself to wait. Then I remembered my shrinking access and panicked in the opposite direction, like I needed to extract as much money as possible before the door closed. That logic makes no sense when you're calm. It makes perfect sense when you're trapped. I sent one more update based on older knowledge and general trends. Northline paid. I moved half the crypto into a new wallet for the first time, trying to feel safer. It didn't help. I started sleeping badly. I had dreams about sitting in interrogation rooms even though I'd never been in one. I jumped when my phone rang. I stopped checking the burner unless I was alone. I began to imagine that Eric had already been caught and was cooperating. I had no evidence, just a growing certainty that the quiet couldn't last forever. For the first time since I started, I seriously considered disappearing from Northline without explanation. No goodbye, no final message, just silence. But I didn't do it yet. I told myself I needed a little more money first. Just a small buffer. One last stretch. That phrase again. One last. It never means what you think it means. The thing I'd been dreading finally happened, just not in the way I imagined. Eric stopped showing up to work. No announcement. No goodbye email. His desk sat empty for 2 days before HR quietly boxed up his stuff. People whispered. Someone said he'd left suddenly. Someone else said personal reasons. Nobody knew anything real, or if they did, they weren't saying. I felt sick. I was convinced this was it. Convinced he'd been caught. Convinced my name was next on a list. I didn't sleep. I didn't message Northline. I barely spoke at work. Every time my email pinged, my heart jumped. Every calendar notification felt like a trap. Then a week passed. Nothing happened. No interview. No audit. No suspension. No cops. The world just continued. That messed with my head almost more than if something bad had happened. Eventually, I heard through a coworker that Eric had checked himself into rehab. Alcohol, apparently. Maybe true. Maybe a cover story. I'll never know. But his disappearance scared me straight in one specific way. I stopped sending new information. Not officially. Not with a declaration. I just went quiet. Northline messaged twice. Any updates? Then, a week later. Still active? I didn't reply. I powered the burner off and left it in the shoebox. Days passed. Then weeks. No one knocked on my door. No sudden job loss. No consequences. I started breathing again. Slowly. Carefully. But something had changed permanently. I didn't feel relieved. I felt contaminated. Like I'd handled something radioactive, and even though I'd put it down, I was still glowing. I went to work every day expecting the other shoe to drop. It never did. I had gotten away with it. At least, legally. That realization didn't feel like victory. It felt like a quiet, hollow sentence being passed in a courtroom only I could see. Getting away with it isn't a clean ending. There's no finish line, no release, no moment where everything resets. Life just keeps going, and you're the same person who did the thing. I stayed at the company another year. I kept my head down. I stopped paying attention to big picture patterns on purpose. I trained myself not to look too closely. I transferred to a less sensitive role as soon as an opening appeared, even though it paid a little less. I told myself it was for work-life balance. Really, it was self-preservation. I never turned the burner phone back on. I never deleted it either. It's probably still in that shoebox somewhere. Battery long dead. The crypto still exists. I slowly cashed most of it out over time, carefully, in small amounts. I told myself I was just reclaiming money I'd already earned. That word still makes me uncomfortable. On the outside, I became more stable, debt manageable, life boring. Inside, I felt split. Part of me knew I'd done something seriously wrong. Another part of me knew I'd saved myself from financial ruin. Those two truths refused to merge. I don't feel crushing guilt every day. I also don't feel innocent. It's more like carrying a low-grade fever that never breaks. I'm more secretive than I used to be. Not just about crimes, about everything. Feelings, problems, thoughts. I learned too well that information has value, and that lesson poisoned other parts of my personality. Trust feels naive now. I don't like that about myself, but I don't know how to undo it. I think about Eric sometimes. I wonder if he really went to rehab. I wonder if he got caught. I wonder if he's living with worse ghosts than mine. I'll never reach out. Some doors are safer left closed. I used to imagine confession would feel cleansing. It doesn't. It just feels honest. And honesty, it turns out, isn't the same thing as redemption. The biggest lesson wasn't that crime doesn't pay. Sometimes it does. The bigger lesson is that crime reprograms you. It quietly changes how you measure risk, how you justify choices, how you see other people. Before all this, I thought bad people were a separate category. Predators, monsters, cartoon villains. Now I know most of them look like exhausted adults with bills and rationalizations. They look like me. I learned how easy it is to build a moral framework that serves only you. You don't wake up one day deciding to be corrupt. You wake up deciding to solve a problem, then you solve another, then another. Eventually, your solutions become your identity. I also learned that secrecy feels safer than trust because trust creates witnesses. Witnesses create vulnerability. Vulnerability creates consequences. That logic works. It also rots you from the inside. You start guarding everything. You stop being fully known by anyone. You become a locked room. There's a kind of loneliness in that I don't know how to describe properly. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet and constant, like background radiation. And if I could go back, I don't know if I'd have the strength to make a different choice. That's the most uncomfortable truth of all. I'd like to believe I would. I'd like to believe I'd choose struggle over corruption. But I know the exact pressure points that broke me before. I know they still exist. So when people talk about what they'd never do, I don't really believe them anymore. I don't judge them either. I just think about how thin the line actually is. Much thinner than we want to admit. If you're reading this and you're broke, scared, cornered, and staring at an opportunity that feels wrong but necessary, I won't insult you with simple advice like, just don't do it. I know how useless that sounds when you're drowning. What I will say is this: whatever problem you're trying to solve, crime doesn't solve it. It trades it for a different problem. One that sticks to you. One that quietly grows roots. Money stress is loud. Criminal stress is silent. Silent stress is worse. If you're tempted because you think you're smart enough to not get caught, understand that intelligence isn't the deciding factor. Luck is. Timing is. Other people's mistakes are. You can do everything right and still lose. You can do everything wrong and still win. Neither outcome means you deserved it. If you're tempted because someone you trust is already doing it, remember that you don't actually know what they're dealing with. You only see the benefits. You don't see the insomnia, the paranoia, the mental rehearsals of disaster, the version of themselves they don't like anymore. I'm not telling you I'm a cautionary tale who ended up in prison. I didn't. That almost makes this harder to hear. Some people get away with it. I did. And I still wouldn't recommend becoming someone who has to carry a secret like this. There are weights you can put down later in life. This isn't one of them. It becomes part of how you stand. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I believe in it in a meaningful way anymore. This isn't a redemption story. It's a documentation of a choice and the shape it gave my life. I'm not proud of what I did. I'm not constantly ashamed either. It's closer to acceptance. I did this. It's mine. If nothing else, I hope this post complicates the way people think about wrongdoing. Not to excuse it, not to romanticize it, but to understand it. Most crimes aren't born from grand evil. They're born from small desperation and a door that opens at the wrong moment. I walk through life now, looking normal, acting normal, blending in. That's probably the most unsettling part. People like me are everywhere. Not because we're special, because we're ordinary. If you take anything from this, let it be this: the first secret is the most expensive one you'll ever sell. After that, the price only looks like money.